Good morning, biology students. Mr. Adair here, filming another video for you guys. If you are following the weekly schedule, you'll be looking at this video on Tuesday, and um, and we'll be starting to learn about carbon-based molecules. Now, that might kind of sound, what is a carbon-based molecule? Why do I care about that? But it's really interesting, and we're gonna learn about the molecules that actually make us what we're made up of. And so I think you'll be kind of familiar with this information already. So yesterday was a pH activity. Hopefully you did that and you're on course. Now today is learning about carbon-based molecules, and we live in a carbon world. You've heard of carbon in different forms. You've probably heard of carbon dioxide, CO2, and also there's many types of molecules made out of carbon. And like I said, we live in a carbon world. A lot of the living things, organic living things, are made of carbon. We're going to learn about the four main types of living things that make us, okay? Real quick review. This is from last week. These are some words that you should be familiar with: covalent bond, ionic bond, cohesion, adhesion, solvent, solute, solution, and pH. So when we learned about water, those are some of the things we learned about. All right, before we learn fully about carbon-based molecules, I want to talk, you have to really focus in right now and try to learn this because it can be confusing. When we talk about the molecules that make us and make life, plants and animals, we're going to talk about carbon-based molecules that do that. But you have to go back and remember that all the physical things on Earth, including living things and non-living things, are made of atoms. And when we join an atom together, we have a molecule. So the molecules that make us are called macromolecules, meaning very large molecules. In this picture below, I see three large sugar molecules attached together. So when we have our large molecules attached together, we call that the polymer. The polymer is made up of many individual subunit molecules called the monomer. So we could have one monomer, like a glucose, attached to another and attached to another, and that makes up the whole polymer. A good analogy would be like a train. The macromolecule is the full train, whereas the single monomer that makes up the single units is the one boxcar of the train. Okay, so pause this if you need to, or we'll go back and look at it. Let's get into some specific examples of the four things that we're made up of. All right, the first thing that if we looked inside of our cells, and if we thought about how we metabolize our food to make energy for ourselves, carbohydrates are a large molecule, a macromolecule, that helps us function and makes us who we are. They're embedded in our cell membranes, and we break down carbohydrates for energy to make ATP energy, adenosine triphosphate. We'll learn more about that later. The common name for carbohydrates are sugars and starches. And again, they're broken down to make chemical energy. They're major parts of plant cells. They provide the fiber and the structure. So you've heard about this before because potentially you've heard about like a no carbohydrate diet or things like that. The reason you've heard about this is because, we are what we eat. When I say we are made up of these large molecules like polysaccharides, they're called, actually many sugars, it's because if you really think about it, what we ingest builds up our tissues, right? And we use what we ingest to have our metabolic functions. All right. This video is a crash course, but in Schoology, I'm going to have more information. And for your assignment, you not only need to watch this video and follow along, but you need to go into each of the individual folders that talk about each of the 4 macromolecules. So we're still talking about carbohydrates, and there's 3 others, which we'll get into. The carbohydrates are made up of 3 different types of atoms: carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. A single unit of a carbohydrate, or the monomer, in other words, is called a monosaccharide. Saccharide means sugar, single sugar. All right? If you look at the pictures now, you'll see that we have glucose, which is a monosaccharide. A sucrose is a disaccharide, which is 2. And then we see our polysaccharide, or our polymer of amylose. In class, we would do some more fun labs, but I'm doing my best to keep you guys motivated, and you're doing a great job. So just keep up the energy and keep learning about some of these basics of biology. Okay? All right, the next thing we're learning about, the next major macromolecule, will be lipids. Lipids is another fancy name for fats, oils, and cholesterol. So yeah, we're made of fats. We have lipids that are in our cell membrane. We store lipids for extra energy. Kind of like carbohydrates, the elements, or in other words, the atoms that make up lipids are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Lipids are nonpolar. They do not dissolve in water. Remember how water is a polar molecule? Well, if you've ever put oil in water, it doesn't mix, right? And you've heard this saying, those two mix like oil and water. They don't mix. It's because lipids form like a membrane, and the lipids all come together and the water does not get in. But one thing that can break apart those lipid bonds in water, which we use all the time and you use to wash your dishes, is soap. So if you want to right now at home, you could do a very simple thing. Go get a little pan of water, go put a little bit of vegetable oil or whatever oil is in your cabinet, and then just see how that looks and see how it interacts, and then make some observations, and then add some soap to it and see what happens. All right. The function of lipids, we use them for chemical energy. They form our cell membranes. The monomer is a fatty acid chain, which is, we'll get into that a little bit more. When you do your specific readings, you'll learn more about that. All right, so we've talked about carbohydrates. We've talked about lipids. The next major macromolecule that makes us makes our structure is proteins. Proteins are used for all sorts of things in our body. We get proteins by eating legumes like beans, or meat, fish, eggs. And the monomers of a protein are called amino acids. The atoms that make up proteins are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. That chart you don't need to memorize by any means, but if you look at the chart below, it shows you the 20 different monomers that exist for proteins. Each one of those molecules is a monomer, and it is also an amino acid, the same thing. When those monomers or those amino acids bond together, they form long chains of amino acids. Those long chains are proteins. A protein could be anywhere from a couple hundred amino acids long to thousands. And the order of the amino acids will determine what it does in your body, what that protein does in your body. So if you have an enzyme that helps you digest, let's say milk, lactase helps you digest milk, that protein will have a very specific sequence of amino acids different than other proteins. And again, if you're confused, pause the video, go back, listen. It's a lot of information, but also do the readings that I put on Schoology, because that'll help. This is just what I was just saying. Each has a specific shape and order of amino acids that determine its function. Really, proteins do a lot of the work in the cell. The DNA is what carries the instructions for making proteins, and then the proteins do all sorts of things. They speed up chemical reactions. They do all sorts of things in our body. So they kind of do everything in a way. All right, the last macromolecule that we need to learn about. So we talked about carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and now nucleic acids. You've heard about this before, DNA and RNA. DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, and RNA, ribonucleic acid. The Na stands for nucleic acid. The monomer is called a nucleotide. It consists of a phosphate, a sugar, and a base. The bases, we'll get into that later. We're going to spend a whole unit studying DNA, so I'm not going to get into a ton of the details right now. The atoms that make up DNA are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. DNA is the code that makes proteins. DNA is what we pass to our offspring. You are a combination of the DNA from both of your parents, and we'll learn a lot more about that as well. All right, so this video is about 11 or 12 minutes, and we go quickly through carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. We are learning about these large macromolecules because they are the large macromolecules that make us make our physical structure. If you could take one of your cells, if you could just grab a cell from your skin and look at it under a microscope and really get in there and really look at the molecules and the atoms, which you can't because we don't have that technology right now, but you'd see these types of molecules in your cell. And remember, you're made up of your cells. You're made of trillions of cells. So we're just kind of going from the small to the large, and that's the quick introduction on macromolecules. Your job is to fill out the macromolecule chart by using this video and by also using the readings that I put on Schoology. Come to our Google Meet later this week if you have any questions, and keep working hard and every day do a little something to get better. And I'll talk to you later. Thank you.